Chinese diaspora in the Australasia Sino-British relationships and politics of the late Qing Empire. She was the principal of the photographic exhibition on New Zealand Chinese history, Recollections of Distant Shores, held at the Overseas Chinese Museum in Beijing, and later under the title Being Chinese in Aotearoa at the Auckland War Museum, the Waitangi Treaty Ground Museum, and New Zealand Portrait Gallery in Wellington between 2016 and 2020. So as a result of that, the Chinese Politics Heritage Trust tapped her on the shoulder and commissioned her to write a book on Chinese merchants in New Zealand. Please welcome Dr. Phoebe Li.
Thank you very much, David, for such a generous introduction. Honorable Melissa Li, Minister for Ethnic Communities, Minister of Economic Development, Mr. Rodney Wong, Chairman of the Chinese Politics Heritage Trust, Mr. David Tai, Chairman of the Chinese Community Center, and many distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to join this celebration, which I think is not just about celebrating the publication of a new book, but also about celebrating the great achievements of earlier Chinese migrants and their descendants. From very early on, they have been contributing to the socio-economic development of New Zealand. Unfortunately, this part of the history has for long been neglected in New Zealand's national narrative. For this reason, I want to first express my most sincere gratitude to the Chinese Politics Heritage Trust, which commissioned me to work on this project and has fully financed this beautiful book. As a new migrant from northern China, a complete outsider to the old Chinese settler community, I felt greatly honored to be given this commission. When I began research on earlier Chinese merchants, I repeatedly encountered the same questions, like, what's your village? How long have you been in New Zealand? How do you know our history? I thought that today might be the best opportunity to answer them all, but introduce myself properly. Yes, I'm not a Cantonese. I was born in Inner Mongolia, and I grew up in northeast China, very close to Korea. I began a strong interest in history at a very young age, and that led me eventually to choose history as my major at university. That was in the 1990s, when China was undertaking tremendous changes, resulting from the collation between its state-defined ideology of socialism and its thirst to embrace a market economy. In my home region, many people lost their jobs because the government restructured and prioritized a lot of state enterprises that used to employ these people. There were organized but peaceful protests, and stories of family tragedies were often heard. However, at the same time, there were also people who started their businesses or ventured onto the budding Chinese stock market and became affluent. I was then a very confused Chinese young woman wanting to see the world outside China. So I went to Australia in 1998 to study. After completing a master's degree in educational management in Melbourne, I arrived Auckland in 2001. It wasn't easy for me in the New Zealand labour market of the early 2000s. To begin with, I worked in various low-paid jobs, business, for example, but I still feel compelled to read, write, and think critically. By that time, I, as a marginalized Asian immigrant, had lived for several years in Australia and New Zealand, so decided to conduct a PhD project at University of Auckland that would make a social political study of Chinese immigrants in New Zealand. My doctoral thesis was published in 2013 by Real in the Netherlands, the oldest academic publisher in Europe, under the title A Virtual Chinatown, the diasporic media sphere of Chinese migrants in New Zealand. I had hope to secure an academic position after all that happened. It wasn't an unrealistic hope, given China's growing prominence in the world. It was after New Zealand and China had signed a free trade agreement, which resulted in China becoming New Zealand's largest export market. I thought there would be a need for China literacy in New Zealand. But to my surprise, unfortunately, all my job applications were declined. Therefore, I had to look for different ways of using my specialized knowledge and academic training. By 2013, I knew with certainty that I needed to find a new path that would lead me to a research career in Chinese studies. Returning to China seemed the best way of doing that. I'm not glad that I made the decision. I was lucky enough to obtain 2 research fellowships, one after the other, at Tsinghua University in Beijing, one of the top 2 universities in China. Founded in 1911, Tsinghua attracts some of the best students and teachers in China, and also distinguished international scholars. Its campus offers endless stimulating lectures and seminars to give me inspirations. In my leisure time, I spend a lot at Beijing's numerous museums, art galleries, bookstores, and of course all sorts of restaurants to taste various regional Chinese cuisines. Based in Beijing, I had opportunity to access an enormous intellectual space to learn about Chinese culture. From 2013 to 2019, I toured many parts of China, including 4 trips to Guangdong province. I visited more than 30 Cantonese villages in Kunyu, Jiangxing, Choishan, Sangwei, Huiping, and Zhongshan, where most earlier Chinese immigrants to New Zealand came from. Back to China after 15 years overseas, I found myself developing a fresh understanding of this vast country, its ancient and immediate past. At Tsinghua, my major research project centered around the 100 Days Reform, which aimed to modernize China and was somehow equivalent to the Meiji Restoration in Japan, but failed due to a palace coup. I focused on leading reformers exile and the Chinese Empire Reformers Association. Over 150 this association established by overseas Chinese across the Pacific Rim contributed in important ways to China's political change prior to the 1911 revolution. The research helped me appreciate more than I had ever before how China, the old Middle Kingdom, has moved back and forward. By the way, many Cantonese merchants were active members of this association. So I accumulated a lot of new knowledge about Cantonese migration. My time in China got me considering how I might tell stories of the Chinese overseas, and particularly about those in New Zealand. The idea resulted in a collaboration with John Turner, one of the country's best photographic historians. Thank you, Joe, for coming to today's event. We curated a photographic exhibition on New Zealand Chinese history, which was first hosted by the Overseas Chinese History Museum of China in Beijing in 2016. And then by the Auckland War Memorial Museum, the Treaty Ground Museum, and the New Zealand Portrait Gallery in Wellington between 2017 and 20. I think that some people got to know me through this exhibition. The most important consequence of the exhibition is that I was commissioned by the Chinese Tech Heritage Trust to write a book on early New Zealand Chinese merchants. The project enabled me to start another interesting journey because I have met and talked to many wonderful people, including descendants of early merchants and other old-timers. I had the privilege to share their family history and precious memories, and access their private archives and photo albums, some of which are reproduced in the book. Many of those people that I interviewed are members of Auckland Chinese Community Center. I can see some are sitting here today. Thank you very much for coming. I can't give you a full list of who is who because the list is very long. So I just name a few. I own a lot to the late Golden Wu. He would drive me around whenever I was in Wellington. And the conversations we had inspired me in many of my thoughts. In Auckland, Thomas, Selwyn, and other members of the Rondu family tolerated and endured my enthusiasm and provided me with invaluable archival material. In Dunedin, Duncan Xiuhui opened the old Chongqingtang letters, leading me to investigate the sophisticated operation of the Vietnam shipment, which many of you have immediate connection with. I'm most grateful to the Chinese Tech Heritage Trust for the faith it had in me, especially for the warm support from the past four chairmen, James Ling, Peter Chin, Kai Lui, and Paul Chin, who introduced me to the community of Poltex descendants and helped me build an extensive network for information. And I am particularly indebted to the late Dr. James Ling, who was extremely generous to me, sharing his decades accumulated knowledge and also reviewing and commenting on each chapter of the book manuscript. His constant encouragement and unfailing support accompanied me throughout a rough and bumpy but rewarding journey. This book is dedicated to his memory. There are other people who have been important in making this book possible. Andrew Campbell edited the manuscript, ready for publication. Marie Shenton proofread every word that I wrote. And Haru Senshima's elegant design gave my writing a new life. Thank you for looking. Lastly, I want to give my big thanks to the Auckland Chinese Community Center again for their constant support for my research over the past few years, and also for providing this wonderful venue and organizing the catering for today's gathering. And amazing Connie, where's Connie, has been tirelessly working on book sales. Thank you, Connie, again. Connie. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the food and the book. And go to Connie, buy the book. Thank
you. Please stay here, Phoebe, because we're going to do the Q&A session now. So, yeah.